Hello. Today we are joined by someone who has been on the forefront of AI and data-driven decision making for over a decade. Michal, co-founder of Receeve and seasoned CTO, has not only built successful companies but also played a key role in shaping the future of credit management and AI systems. You built multiple companies with multiple exits and have spent over 14 years working with AI. I've got to ask you, when did your passion for managing technology, data, and business start? Was it always part of the plan, or did it just click one day?
Ooh, good question. So I would say it was a little bit of a kind of evolution ever since, let's say, the first things that I ever played with, built, etc. So the if I go all the way back to the beginning, one of the first things I did was build a platform that manages the electrical grid inside the United States. And part of that was to unlock the
Hmm.
data. They were digitizing, and it's like, well, how do we plan maintenance? Where did lightning strike? All these kinds
Hmm.
of questions for an electrical utility. And at the time, I would say I never really thought about the data. It was sure we were presenting information, we were making information available to different people, and they were making decisions with that information. But I never really, at the time, would say that I thought about it that way. And over, the probably a good decade or so at the beginning, everything that I touched, more or less, I guess randomly, was unlocking data or information for people. So I didn't do a lot of e-commerce or any of those kinds of things, but it was typically business, excuse me, business to business types of things, and trying to answer complicated questions. And about 14-ish years ago, maybe a little bit longer. So I was a venture capitalist for a little while, and one of the things there was basically trying to suck data out of the internet to figure out where were the companies that were actually doing like a really good job at analyzing their traffic and different properties of those companies. And that was how I built deal flow for myself to be able to go talk to entrepreneurs and whatnot. That was then probably a little bit of where for me it became a shift to say, the data needs to be more accessible for me to be able to make decisions as to who am I going to talk to, who am I going to reach out to, do I think this company is going to be valuable or not. And that translated into then, let's say, prior to Receive, doing a company builder for the auto group here in Germany, where it was then, okay, we start a new concept, whatever it is, and now we're having to make the decision of, okay, do we put 3 more million euros into this thing, or do we say, no,
Hmm.
it's not working? And then once you get several of these things up and running, you're sitting there going, okay, which one of them is actually working okay? And consolidating the data together to be able to then actually make those judgment calls. And and then in the process of that, it was I had a company that I built for them in kind of the receivables management space, that we were also then looking at the data in order to drive AI and predictions and things like that, which steps are next best to take in a particular process. And that's where it really kind of crystallized for me to say, well, wait a second, the way the data is prepared and the way the data flows through the systems, that becomes utterly critical for then doing all of these other tasks and all the things that you would want to do in order to make a decision, whether a person's making the decision or the machinery is making the decision.
Okay, we talked before our podcast, and you mentioned like the data became like a drug, and this
Yeah,
stuck in my head. Can you walk us through your through
sure,
that experience?
sure. So what I've seen happen in multiple companies over the years is you start out by then saying, hey, I can give you this piece of data. So like one of my favorite ones was for like what we do and some of the other businesses we built over the years. Did this person interact with the digital touch point? Did they open the email? Did they do something like that? So somebody, it doesn't matter, sales team, marketing team, product team, support, whoever, they come in and they say, well, how many emails did we send? And it's like, well, you query that, you say, well, this is how many we sent. Oh, well, now how many of them were opened? All right, fine. You go and you get the how many of them were opened. Oh, what happened after that? Okay, hold on. You go and you query that and you hand it to them. And it's almost becomes this like, oh, hey, I can go get another data point. And that's why I call it, it's a drug. Like as a data scientist, you could almost say, well, the first one's free. And then after that, it's like, I can't charge you for the rest. But But the thing is it almost becomes that there's no reason to ask for the number. And over the years, it's become like, even at Receive, I had a rule that basically said if somebody asks you for a number, whatever that
Mm-hmm.
number is, that data point, they have to be able to explain the question that they want to ask. So
Mm-hmm.
what is it that you're trying to answer? And they have to give you why. Why do you want that question answered? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you're the person asking for a number and you can't tell me what is the question you're trying to solve and or ask and why you
Mm-hmm.
actually need that question answered, then the data scientist or whoever it was has permission just to say, no, go think about this. Because otherwise it consumes their time producing the drug for the addicts on the other side.
Yeah, having this ability to basically have access to all the data points, with great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. Exactly.
Someone said so. Asking these questions you said is, I think, a good way to exercise this responsibility about managing the time. And this was the first time you've used the data in this awesome way. And you mentioned also you built your second company, and you took a totally different approach
Sure.
with event sourcing. Like, what was behind this decision? Like, what was the steps
Yeah.
you take to?
Sure. So if I look at kind of how things were done, generally speaking, call it even like 10 years ago or longer, you tended to have a classical, let's say, database setup. Somebody would then run queries against the thing. They might have to go to 3 or 4 other locations to get other pieces of data together, logs, or wherever those things might be.
Mm-hmm.
And they would have to then either wrangle the data, clean the data, they'd transform it. The database typically only has the current state of everything. It doesn't have the
Mm-hmm.
historical record of what happened. And what I saw was that it inevitably became, I don't want to say a fight, but it became a discrepancy between how the data was being stored versus the desire to do AI modeling, certain types of
Mm-hmm.
reporting, et cetera. And when starting Receive, one of the things that I did was look at other types of patterns and systems and whatnot. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things I looked at was, how do stock markets work, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and how are certain financial systems, like how are they dealing with the high volume of stuff coming in,
Mm-hmm.
and what are the implications of that? And so I kind of went down a little bit of the rabbit hole of event sourcing, CQRS, and there's a bunch of interesting stuff out there. If you're an architect that wants to know more about that, or even a data person telling an architect, hey, this would be a better way to go. But effectively, what it did is it changed the dynamic. So
Mm-hmm.
everything that happens inside of Receive is more or less an event. And if I were to make a comparison, and why it's applicable to financial services typically, is look at your bank balance. So if you go to your bank account, you log in, sure, there's a balance number on there. But the balance number is actually made up of all the individual transactions that happen underneath it. And
Mm-hmm.
if the bank balance disappears, you can recreate the bank balance by just adding up all the transactions that are underneath it as a foundation. So apply that to everything. So the email that gets opened, for example, you have an event. Hey, the email was
Mm-hmm.
sent to the mail server. Hey, the email got delivered to the recipient. Hey, the email was opened by the recipient, or it failed, or. And each one of these things is an event.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing that, you have just a gigantic event store of
Mm-hmm.
every single, call it, transaction that happened across the entire balance of the thing that you want to look at. And that allows you as a data person to do things like time travel. You say, well, I can recreate the state a month ago because I can just subtract the transactions that happened between then and now, or I can go back to the beginning and add them up to that point in time. And because of that, you can then start mixing things together completely differently than if you just went to a database and then queried information. And it might sound weird, but it's like once you kind of get the, like, seeing everything as an event, it's like, wow, I have a complete overview of everything.
And you can see, if I'm not mistaken, see what event was before, what event was in the current time, and probably having this kind of information, this different events, you can see what could probably happen in the future and predict a little bit of the future. My question is like, I'm wondering about the events and that. Do you have different timelines? I would say like different kind of events are on the different timelines, and you connecting that to see what will happen on different timeline. Or this is like the one timeline with different kind of events. I don't know if I am asking
No,
correct question.
it's a good question. So you can set it up to kind of do, I guess you could set it up to do both. Now, the way we approached it was put everything inside of one stream, like one timeline. And because you eventually have an emit time that's there for when this particular event happened. And what you do is you filter off of the characteristics or the properties that are then relevant to you. So if you said, hey, I want this account, or I want this batch of accounts in this particular country, and I wanted to know what happened from, I don't know, October 1st to today on all the emails, because everything's in one gigantic store, you can effectively just grab those. I mean, you're querying them, but you're querying for this types of events from this time frame with this filters on there. And that allows you to have one gigantic store out of which you can then do whatever you want. And it's, if you have something specialized, you can also either in real time or daily, monthly, whatever, you can actually process the stuff. And because we do this as well, we know which events we need for certain particular ideas, services, etc., to work, like the AI. So we feed those in real time into the services that need them. So they have like a separated kind of chunk of the stream of events that they need in order to do their job. Versus then, let's say, somebody who's working on the dashboard and then they just use the master set of everything and query against that master list. So you can distribute the events to the appropriate locations, but I would still recommend having a data lake or one kind of common thing that allows you to, let's say, create a new service or do other activities where then you just go to one source to go grab everything.
So if I understand correctly, you have this data lake with different kind of data points with different kinds of data, and you have different kinds of events. Basically, these events are going, for example, to some kind of AI models, and they are, I would say, very hungry to eat a lot of events. And if they eat a lot of events, they have like more knowledge to make better decisions along the way. And this sounds awesome.
And you also have, so for example, we do a lot more of reinforcement learning. Like that's one of the things that we've specialized more in for what we do. And and one of the things that we can do is, instead of training a model, so there's certain AI models, you spend a lot of time training them and things like that. We can actually use reinforcement learning models that make the decision and capture the feedback in real time, because we can take the events that are flowing through the system and then route them over to those models. And then that way we have models that just update themselves without us having to do any training.
Okay. And do you have models which can decide, for example, we need different kind of events, and please give this events to us because we need this to make better decisions? Or...
So the way we handle that is, when we look at designing a model, we say, which question is it that we want to ask? Which decision do we want to take? And especially on our reinforcement learning side, we will say, this is part of a decision or a decision in its entirety that I need to make. So one of the things that I like to do is narrow slice the decision. So if I said to you, hey, let's go to a movie this weekend, that's a very big question. And yeah, you could train a model to say, okay, this movie, Saturday, 3 p.m., whatever. But you can also take that decision and break it down and say, okay, which day would be the better to go to the movie? Which movie would be the best one to go to? Which time would then be the best? Where should the seats be? Blah, 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 et cetera. You can break it down into small pieces. And for us, we'll look at the scope of the question that we want to answer, the decision we want to take, and say, how narrow can we make this scope so it's easy for somebody to understand what the decision is? And then we look at it and say, well, what influences that decision? So let's take like time of day for delivering an email, for example. What will happen is we'll look at that and then we'll say, all right, what could go into this? Now we will do a little bit of we'll look at the features we could put into a model. We'll test a couple things. We will actually then work with the historical data to then see, do we have everything? Typically, it's like, yes, we have everything, or we have 85% or 90% based off of the events that we have. And we'll then say, okay, we're going to start with these features. If along the way, we then notice, well, wait a second, we don't have whatever the thing is. So an example from like 5 or 6 years ago was we looked at the funnel analysis. So we took one AI step that was effectively like an A/B test on steroids, is the way I would call it. And we were looking towards saying we wanted to put different scores towards the different parts of the funnel, with the ultimate thing being that somebody makes a payment towards, let's say, an invoice that hasn't been paid. And we said, well, here's a couple of steps in the middle. And we looked at what we had, and then we said, well, you know what? In order to reward the AI, we actually need to introduce an event here that represents this particular thing. It was like somebody going to the payment page, and I can't remember which step it was, but we looked at it and we said, this one's probably helpful. So we went in from an engineering perspective and then said, when this particular point in time is hit, emit this event into the pipeline or into the ecosystem. And then we were able to then take that, put it into the AI to see, did it actually make a difference? But it wasn't anything where then we were penalized by not having had that before, if it makes any sense. We were just able to analyze it and say, we think this works. So it's a low cost implementation on our side to then add a particular event just to try it out.
And like, I'm wondering, like, what tools or systems did you rely on, like, building this approach?
So I'm sure there's probably a bunch of stuff out there you could use. This is probably the weird thing. I don't necessarily know all of the extra tooling that you could probably use, because we more or less, I would almost say we have a framework for ourselves that we kind of developed doing this. Now, the critical thing I would tell people is there's a concept that's the contracts. So like the API contract, and it's effectively like we have an internal API contract, and that contract has that any event or message, because you would create an event sometimes by issuing a command like, hey, command reset the user password or something, and then it's like, that emits an event saying, hey, the user password has changed. So, but all of those things have a specification. For us, it's all JSON schemas, but it's basically like, here are the requirements for it to be emitted into the system. So it has an emit time, has a type of event that's in the system, and then it has the payload associated with the particular event. And that was basically enough, along with then creating some, I'll call them infrastructure related code to make sure that if you emitted that event, that it was validated before you emitted it into the system. So that way we don't have any, let's say, pollution inside the event stream. Like, you can only put stuff in that is actually valid. And that was enough to basically get this concept up and running and working. Because at that stage, then it's like, if you have only clean events emitted into it, then regardless of where they flow to, you know that you can be comfortable that the data is there that you need for whatever it is. Outside of that there's a bunch of other, let's say, ways to probably implement the engineering side of what we did. For us, it was fairly straightforward in the sense of, we just said, well, there's one programming language for the entire platform, that's JavaScript, and that allows a developer to move back and forth up and down the stack. And we standardized these things like the message emission or the event emission and stuff like that. So a developer doesn't have to think about it, and it maintains the consistency and the integrity across everything. And those were probably the things that were most critical, because then anytime somebody needed to create something new, there was always a input, and this you could this you could probably, if you wanted to, use like event storming. I think that's in domain-driven design, but but you could use like an event storming session with the business people and say, hey, here's this event or this is what happens in the flow. And it's pretty straightforward that with the way the schemas are designed and the way that people implement it, that, once you say, I think even on that, we used what's in the event storming. So it's like, here's the event, and then here's the noun or the object, and then here's the verb on the end. So it's like, hey, an email was sent. And once those things became standardized, a developer could do the implementation. The data scientist or whoever was looking at it from the other side knew what the shape of the thing was, or could it influence the shape of it by saying, hey, can you make sure these 5 things are in the payload? And then it all worked pretty well. And the thing I would say is, when you do this, I guess it would be kind of the event catalog or the data catalog becomes important, because if you're internal talking to everybody about it, it's not as big a deal because people get used to it and they can just read the schema and say, oh, okay, this thing is here, and I can read the parameter name and I know what it is because I have the context. What I noticed is, if you turn around and in our case, we do this, we allow some of the enterprise customers, if they want to, let's say, have the data delivered into a data warehouse or a data lake, for them to actually run queries just in whatever they got, Tableau or any of those things. And in those cases, you do have to explain it a little bit better or differently, because they're used to querying just a regular database table. And when we say, oh, it's actually the entire historical record of everything that happened, they look at it and they go, well, wait, what do you mean? Like, they ask a couple of questions. We're like, oh, wait, hold on. Yeah, this is everything that happened. So if you want to know the state, you actually have to calculate the state across, these events with this, da, 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 da. And then after 1 or 2 turns on that, then you get this like, oh, this is really cool, because it actually, I don't have to like translate anything or whatnot. It's like, no, yeah, you're right. It's like everything is literally right there, and you can combine it together however you need. And whether or not there's a good framework, I know we've looked at a couple of tools to help with creating that catalog for people. I don't think we found one that we're completely satisfied with yet, to be honest. But otherwise, yeah, a lot of it's homegrown.
Some of the best things from life in life are homegrown, so
Yeah.
I totally get it. And let's talk a little bit about the future. Like, with your experience in both AI and data, how do you see AI evolving over like maybe 1 or 2 years?
So I think there's going to be, there'll still continue to be this, I guess, kind of, I'll call it a hype race between what everybody is seeing with like all the LLMs and everything like that. So I don't know that will go away anytime soon. I think there might be a realization that those things aren't going to just, let's say, replace everybody's job like right away in the next 2 years kind of thing. Or at least I assume that's kind of set in, because even the implementation rollouts, when you look at the data around that, it looks like everybody's being really optimistic about like, yes, of course we use it everywhere. And it's like, there's just one guy sitting over there that happens to be using it out of a team of 100. So I kind of see that we won't come out of that wave. Some realism may have like set in. I also have seen people that realize, because it's effectively predicting the next word, that if you have the right inputs that go in, it will predict the next correct word. So I think that'll continue to improve. It'll still probably remain a little bit hyped for the time being. I think we'll find that there, even for ourselves, when we look at like something like that the not so gigantic ones, that more specialized ones will become more valuable, because you just don't need as much stuff poured into them to get them to be very efficient. I think what we'll also see is that I guess there's a little bit of maybe not a solid definition on this one, but the agent concept will get fleshed out a little bit more. So it used to be like, when I did this or started doing these different models years ago, like we would have an ensemble of agents that more or less produced an answer and kind of voted on like, hey, I think it'll be $2 tomorrow, and oh, I think it'll be $6. And then, between the group of models or whatnot, they would kind of sort out what the answer was going to be. Now I think even with stuff that I've played with, there are certain things where it's like I did one or two things where it's like, okay, you set up the agent that can execute the code, where then it's got a secure area to go execute without screwing anything up. The agent that then kind of drafts the code, there's still, let's say, a person interacting with it to say they look at it, say, yeah, go ahead, and then it hands it off, it executes, it comes back, and then you do some turns on that. I think we will see, it won't be an overnight thing everywhere, but we will start to see some gains there where I would say a software craftsman, if I talk about coding, that they will be able to leverage those tools to become a lot more effective. Right now, even for us, it's like if I say, hey, we need to check something, it's pretty easy to go to one of the LLMs, say, give me a script for this, execute that script and get the result without having to spend time on Stack Overflow or any of that. What I think you also see is that even for myself, because I also run products and things like that, where I use those technologies is to say, hey, I need to kind of get like a kickstart on thinking about something. So it's like, here, go bring me questions that would be asked when looking at like this particular feature. You start getting those things and it's like, okay, these 3 or 4 questions are relevant. I'm going to take those and I'm going to flesh those out. So in a lot of these cases, whether it's the coding, let's say product management, even maybe marketing related stuff and whatnot, I think you will see more and more people realize, hey, this gets you to like 85%. And then the rest of it, you as like the expert or whatnot can kind of fill in the rest of the context, and that'll continue to improve. Do I see? I mean, then you can apply the same thing. I mean, the reinforcement learning we've got versus reinforcement learning that's doing the things with the robots and the driverless cars and whatnot. That stuff will continue to improve as well. Now, does it mean we have like AGI in a year? Well, like everybody's like, hey, we'll have AGI. Like, I don't know. That sounds to me kind of like a Elon Musk thing where it's like, yes, tomorrow we're on Mars, and then it takes like 10 years. So I think it'll be a little bit of a mixture in the sense of what we're going to have. It's obviously in the last year or so come quite a ways. So it's like now, for example, if I for a network here in town, it's like for Christmas. Years ago, you'd have to go create maybe an image or go find something online, edit the image and whatnot to be able to create like an invitation. With this, now it's like I just go in and type like, hey, I need an invitation for this, and then it spits something out. And then I look at it, say, okay, modify this one thing. It changes it, and I'm like, okay, that's good enough for what I need. And voila, an hour gets saved here and there. So it'll be really exciting to see what other stuff kind of comes in. I think if I look at from the receive standpoint, what we're seeing is that businesses are starting to get to the point where they say, okay, I can't allow for hallucination for certain customer interactions, especially for us financial services and things. But what we're seeing is that people are starting to say, well, hold on. Even if I don't necessarily, I can't allow for that, I don't really understand maybe what this thing is doing. I still have to start moving in that direction today. And I think you'll see that more and more maybe frustration comes out with some of these older IT systems. So there was the whole thing of like Klarna said, hey, they're getting rid of Salesforce or whatever a couple weeks ago. And yeah, honestly, that's like my opinion on that is because a lot of the systems, just like we were talking about, like a database where you query versus an event stream, those systems weren't set up with like an event stream. So if you want to do certain types of AI modeling and things to optimize process and whatnot, it's just harder in some of those old architectural paradigms to do so. And I think you'll start to see that that's where there's got to be a shift. Either the big players, Salesforce, yeah, sure, they're changing to Agentforce or whatever it is they're going to do now. They're going to start also implementing things in a different manner than they used to in the past, or they're going to have to, because to unlock the power of all of these AI models, like the AI itself has become commoditized, in my opinion, over the last 14 years, 10 years. But the restriction on being able to use it effectively has always been how do you get the data into the machinery, and that's where I think hopefully in the next 18 months you will start to see that it's like people start picking either platforms like us, where then they say the data is already in a way that we either use their models or we can put our people in place to use the data for models, because we have people that do that on our customer base. Or the providers will have to start shifting towards to be able to offer that. And that would be for me the thing that really unlocks everything drastically, is if more and more and more of the platforms that are out there shift towards a data model that is more usable by AI.
Okay, so like I was thinking about, you mentioned about using the AI in the models, and I was thinking about AI for productivity. Like, do you have thoughts about measurement of effectivity of people using AI? Like, because by using AI, you probably can work faster and better than person who doesn't use AI. Like, this is like one point. So, do you thought about something like that? Like, how do you would
Sure,
approach this?
sure. So I have kind of, I guess maybe it's what I've done with most everything over the years anyway, along the AI or the modeling. I tend to start with that question of what is it that we want to solve, or what's the decision that we want to make. Part of the reason of doing that is to then say, don't over engineer what it is that I need to actually get the productivity gain, and all of it is productivity gain, I guess, for what we do. And there's also a little bit of a trade-off. So if I look at an example recently, we introduced the ability for the AI, using some of the LLMs and things like that, to go through a multi-step process to say, hey, a message went out, doesn't matter, SMS, email, whatever. The person on the other side responds back to it. Now, typically what happens is that response goes into an inbox somewhere or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody then glances at that and then sends back a response. So, you could put some, let's say, older programming logic on top of it if you want, to try to hit some keywords or whatever, and then say, okay, I think this is what's got to go back. But it's kind of hit or miss as to whether it's actually what the response needs to be. But you could do some stuff like that. But we very rarely see anybody do something like that because of the sensitivity of, let's say, somebody asking a question when there's a financial issue. And so what we did was we said, well, and we talked to different customers about this, there's a trade-off here between how much you're paying a person to look at these things versus, let's say, having the machinery make the judgment call. And what we did was, at the beginning, we said, hey, how much of the phone calls, so in our case, there's a lot of phone calls, people calling a bank or whatever. And we kind of asked how many of the phone calls are garbage phone calls. So when I say garbage phone call, I mean somebody kind of calls up and says, hey, I can't remember the IBAN that I'm supposed to send the money to. Can you list that for me? And then the person would sit there and read off, in Germany, it's like 19, 21 digits or whatever, and trying to confirm that the person actually got it. So it takes a while to get through that transaction. And that's for me, it's literally for me a waste for both people, the consumer on the one side and the person on the other. They should just have something where they can copy and paste it, more or less. And so we started out in saying, okay, if a person calls, then they say, hey, I don't know the IBAN. You just more or less click a button and it sends them. You say, do you want it via SMS or email? And it sends it to them right away. And then they can basically say, okay, thanks for calling. And then instead of spending 2 minutes on the phone, they spend 10 seconds. It has nothing to do with, let's say, modeling, but I pointed out that these are the things that when we talk to customers, that it's they're thinking about how do they optimize that time. And I'm always saying you want your people to do the most complex things, because those are the things that humans are good at, is connecting the dots on complex things. So now we go through the next iteration. The next iteration is that scenario. Somebody replies back. And what we do now is we have a multi-stage process that's using different AI models that then more or less looks at what it is that the consumer has sent and says, what exactly do they want? Because, an LLM can do summarization, for example, pretty well. So we say, what does this person actually want? And it's I don't know. Hey, can you tell me when I bought this thing? Okay. So then you turn around And as the bank or whoever it is, you don't allow the LLM to directly, let's say, write a response because there's a risk that it accidentally just picks something and then sends back, well, I don't know, you bought a car last week. It's like, no, like, no, they didn't buy a car last week because it thinks that sounds good. So the thing that we did was we put a different model in place to say, okay, if the person wants to know what was this transaction about or what did I buy, that it actually has a response that answers that question that's already been pre-approved by the people that work there. And basically the process as it goes, it says, hey, what is it that the person's asking for? And then what's the thing that matches as a response that goes out the door? So that way they have control of the messaging that goes out. They don't have to worry about the side effects. And yet we're stringing together different models to be able to, let's say, pull that process off. And that's where then I see like a lot of very interesting things that increase the productivity. So we've had customers that then turn around and say, I have too many communications coming in. There is no way for me to process this. I've got 10 people, 100 people or whatnot. And I'm getting hundreds, if not thousands of messages coming back. And in that case, what they'll end up doing at the beginning is saying, I want a person just to glance at it. They'll say, this is what they want. Here's the response. And the person just clicks OK. So it's kind of like that phone call. And once they say, I am comfortable with it, and I know it gets to 99 point whatever percent accuracy that the response going back is fine. And if the model can't find an answer, it'll just flag it that a person should look at it. And then they can decide if they need to create a new response. But once they get comfortable with it, then they just put it on autopilot. And those hundreds or thousands of requests that are coming in every day are just automatically answered where they have comfort in the fact that it's already a response that they're comfortable with end to end. That takes out thousands of hours. And it's the same with years ago, we did something similar with reducing the phone calls. We were able to reduce the phone calls by 67% just by allowing the AI to say, hey, use a different channel, get the people the information. You don't have to call all these people. And those are the things that I think, like, because of the models and because of AI, that you'll start seeing these drastic shifts where if somebody can cut out 2/3 of the phone calls, they should be running around like screaming, like fireworks going off. And those are the kinds of efficiency gains and productivity gains that we're seeing. It's just a matter then on the broader, let's say, societal basis of, as more and more of these things get rolled out, you will start to see that it's like, I don't know, you can, it doesn't necessarily mean that you reduce staff because the argument is always, hey, we'll lose people. But no, it's probably your people have so much work to do, they will never catch up on it. Yeah. And you can just actually keep the people you have, but you can put like 100 times more volume in there and actually have them focus on the thing that's most valuable and let the machinery do the rest.
Yeah, like my thought on that is like you don't build $1 million company if your people are doing $10 jobs. So by using AI, you can make sure that your people are concentrating on the jobs, complex jobs you mentioned, because they are very, very good at that. And it's not about firing them. It's like implementing their knowledge to the very complex problems they can solve and bring more value than any AI couldn't at this point. So like this is my approach to that. Okay, so I just have one question. Like we talk about AI models and AI in different companies. How are you using AI to make your work faster or better? Like you mentioned this before a little bit, but like how you implemented AI in your day-to-day work to make your work faster or better or both?
So for me personally, I would call it maybe two areas, although you could maybe lump them together into the same bucket. So outside of the product stuff that we actually build that helps our customers, for me personally, what I find is this, I would call it maybe like a brainstorming formulation of something, whatever the thing is. That's where right now it's most effective for myself personally. Now, this might be, hey, I need to answer a question. I know how the data is structured in our system, and therefore I need a script to be able to go do this. Or like if I had to, example from this week, I needed to have a cost analysis of particular AWS setup or whatnot. I knew what it was that I wanted to get. I didn't really want to spend the time, either an engineer or myself, to build the scripting to do it. So I just went in and said, hey, I have these 10 different types of resources in AWS. I have this going on, etc. Please develop me just a simple shell script to go get the data. So do the cost calculation on factors, and just have it be able to spit out like a CSV or something I can just put into a Google Sheet and then look at the answer. And that process then takes, instead of probably a few hours to go through what would prior been researching it and like figuring out exactly what the CLI is for AWS to go get the cost thing. Like that's down to 15 minutes of tweaking it a little bit just to see what the output is. And voila, that's a huge, at least for me, productivity gain. And I get a question answered much quicker. If it's, call it this more brainstorming-ish kind of concept or topic, there will be times where then I say, okay, as a blah, blah, blah type of, IT manager, agent, blah, like I'll say, pretend you are this particular category of person. I'm going to throw this concept in there and give me the 10 questions you would ask about this. And then it starts listing those questions out. And it's like, okay, and then you can kind of play a little bit of bouncing some ideas around. And that is then useful to, at least for me, from a product marketing, product perspective, to come up with some ideas to test. So, I mean, I would still turn around and take those things that's not gospel. I'm not going to turn around and say that's the thing. But at least now I have something that I can put into a pitch deck to go see, is anybody actually really interested in this? And it helps on that, where you don't get stuck per se right away. Trying to like, okay, it's good to think about it from the other perspectives, but it's like if you're sitting there having to do that the whole day, if you can reduce that into also, hey, getting 15 minutes worth of like, here's a brain dump of questions to look at. That's also, I find, at least personally, it accelerates the process of trying to get to a result of, hey, this is the thing we go test. And those are probably the two right now for me, which are the most valuable productivity gains that I get from AI. For myself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure hearing about your journey and how you basically revolutionize the way data and AI are used through events. For everyone listening, make sure to subscribe for more great insights like this. And remember, AI and data isn't just tools, they are game changers when used right. Thank you so much for today.
Thank you.